Can't even tell if I'm live. You can just see my slightly frayed hair because it's been out in the sun a lot, and I'm not even sure. I mean, the lighting in here sucks. I can't really do much about it that I care to. Like getting up, I won't. I refuse. In any sense, I can tell that the mic is running. That's a good thing. I don't normally talk very loud, so um, apparently I'm supposed to do something to fill my time, as though I'm not busy enough. You can't see all the damn books I study. Let me show you. I will show you really quick. There's more at the end of that table over there, but uh, in any sense, here's the dilemma: having to put myself in a situation where I'm sorting out other people's delirious nature. Um, I'm kind of stuck in an area that's not very diverse. It has its redundancies and the fact that it doesn't allow for expansive thinking unless there's something that would best represent the dominant culture or ethnicity here, and uh, in that, of course, give them more benefit, more gain, and it's something that I'm doing correctly, and in the same sense, once it's revealed the character as me, it's like suddenly I start getting obstructions, and I call them roadblocks because let's use that old term, life is a highway. But in any sense, a lot of friction, because people do sadly become jealous and infuriated, where if they've commonly just discriminated against you or your ethnicity, or just things that you feel represent you best. It again, it infuriates them to where they go from just general distaste to seeking to sabotage, and it's more or less all these efforts, instead of putting them in to be more effective in their own sense, they would rather put all these efforts in to defame you, because it makes them feel less insignificant. And it's the rhetoric is, who at any point ever gave you the insight to no longer care about what it is you feel would best represent you and all your efforts. Whereas you have, somebody like me who presents himself, who wants to promote their intelligence, because, you know, let's say that a majority of the time that it is that you become the yes man, or the one, um, those missteps that you pretty much subjugate yourself to at the behest of others, at somebody else pretty much saying, well, I've never come to mm, provide that type of reflection in my own time, and this me speaking for them as to your potential, your capabilities, because generally you've been stereotyped or generalized, and more or less what they're stating is, I can't accept that, and I won't allow that. And in any and all future encounters, I will attempt to just discredit your efforts, because again, because of that generational, I call it generational hatred, but just because of that generational conditioning, there's nothing that will change the way that I see you. And for that reason, I will continue, and I will attack you personally. I will attack your character. I will seek to, defame you, discredit your efforts, just more or less mm, take the light away from all the good things that you did, for just not necessarily the benefit of myself, while it will, that's the overall goal. Um, but to more or less just create this sort of, I guess I can call it turmoil, that it's will make it seem to where nothing you can do is right, even though there's nothing that's changed from the way it's been done. It's just the fact that if you're the person doing it, it's just not done right. And is that not indirect racism? Just because somebody's not cracking a whip at you, or calling you racial slurs, I mean, if they're pretty much subjugating you to this type of treatment, I mean, what person would want to come around and be around others or other people who have the intent to either lay physical harm or just make it to where you have no opportunity to even feed or clothe yourself just because they believe, in all their wisdom, if all this wisdom was that grand, they wouldn't be working the same job for, the low hourly pay that they do, right? I mean, but what they're saying is because we have just so much more of this by way of generational conditioning, we have all this much more um, intelligence over you, then that would mean that everything, and that's like saying that all the hours that I put into studying, all the schoolwork that I've completed, all the grades that I've received and earned, and all of the hypotheticals, the theories, the discussions that I've had with instructors and professors and other people that has created, it makes me memorable in a sense to where if there's a question, it doesn't get ignored. It's something that I do have a few minutes for you, or yes, let's go ahead and exchange ideas, or let me get your take on this. And it's within that same action, or within that same stage of just social development, that a lot of people, they never experienced that. Again, their continuum, their daily routine is just simply going to work, going home. It doesn't include, putting into consideration the way that your actions affect others, or the way that you as a person would, with all this extensive study, seek to be more effective in a positive manner, to whereas you're able to not only interact, but you're able to manage the way that you're presented, the way that you present your self-image, to where it's going to positively affect others. And in that same light, where it is that you are able to, sort of, and I call it move around, but the way you're able to sway direction, not necessarily in, a point of view that you may put upon somebody else, but the way that you're able to interact with people of different backgrounds, or people that have different, social economic levels, or anybody that is not going to be in direct agreement with you, regardless. And this is the other side of the spectrum. And in that same light, that same image be presented and accepted. It does not necessarily need to be revered, but if people accept it, that means they respect it. And I have not had any issues to where I come into contact with people and they are just directly hostile, because in any sense, let's take a step back to where my character is offensive to the point to where my mannerisms or my actions create hostility. Of course, there is, sort of, how do you put? There's this mentality here in my part of the state where, um, let's just say that the route to discussion is generally confrontational and solved through physicality, and that's pretty sad. Where people can't, with philosophy, with discussion, with logic, even semanticism, or uh, let's even say, I forget what this is. It's there's another topic. I believe it's, pragmaticism. You have the chance to display your point of view and give light to others as to what contributing factors led to that opinion. And it may not be something that drives you, but just generally it's going to be the way that you are able to reflect on certain subjects or topics without it being a direct implication as to your point of view. Just generally what it is you believe, or things that are structured and placed in a sense to where you can almost recognize another person's thought pattern, and then provide to them the opportunity to reflect, as opposed to just closed statements to where this is my opinion, this is how it is, and that's the way it's always been, and that's likely the way it will be. And those are, confrontational statements. Those are closed-ended arguments. And you know who stands to benefit where, and this is rhetorical again, but in more of a pragmatic sense, who stands to benefit, whereas again, nobody's able to recall anything of what I've just stated, even the last 60 seconds of it, and place it on an application, or uh, build a foundation, or even see the structure to whereas if it's something that I'm reflecting on and it's just a generality as to my observances into the daily situation and what is known as my circumstance, why is it now anything I say, even if it's even if it's by provocation of others' actions or others' hostility, that I'm maintaining this equilibrium to where I'm not being confrontational, I'm reflecting on it, and yet it's not the answer that they want because unfortunately, again, um, in this part of the state, there's just a lot of direct hostility if it's if it's not something that has been the way of life, or if it's again coming from a minority. Me being a native, I mean, I think if my culture has managed to survive prior to colonization for, a millennia, then we might have, some sort of stability. We might have that stability as to what it takes to, you know, live off of what it is that centers us, and it not being anything destructive. I don't think there's been any sort of anything outside of just regional conflicts with Native Americans or Mexicans or vice versa, to where there was that sequence for colonization in other countries or other continents. There has not been that. I mean, Hispanics and natives have always been subject to either white colonization or the Spaniards, or I'm sure it expands past that. But I mean, there's always been that integration of culture that Mexican culture and Hispanic culture and native culture have accepted, to where there's documented history of other nations like even Portugal, but Germans moving here into Texas, and there's cities that are named after German culture. A lot of people may redirect to give a more recent, up to date perspective, but just live in the current time where you consider what is modern as to what placement and what is placement, whereas everything that is given before you is more or less a modern convenience and not necessarily a direct way to express ideals, but more or less a way to have them more or less put on a platform to be evaluated. And then in that sense, you see a lot of things that motivated in the past, and that just being a general broad blanketing for a population or a populace, now not only being a staple but overlooked. Because if you were to take away a lot of things that made, and made such sort of a strong word, but a lot of things that created success, be it an opinion or something that's promoted and it becomes widely accepted, if you were to take that away, or if it becomes, how do you say, shadowed with history, what do you have? And a lot of people may define that as a fallacy. But if you were to take away things like the internet, and that sounds very strong, it sounds almost too tough, but if you were to take something like this away, given the amount of time that you facilitate it, use it for leisure or luxury, where is it you find your rationale at that point? If you've always validated your point of view by seeking groups of others who share the same general opinion, or just in one direction, are you misleading yourself through the sense that this general opinion, be it an example of a favorite color, favorite food, favorite TV show, or political, religious, anything that's even more intense, such as that, and yet those who share that same one opinion may have altering views, altering opinions, contrasting perspectives into the same list of applications. If somebody says, "Well, I have this political point of view, but this is my religion," that you know is a lot of time what's is creative, or is the source of creation for that friction, where um, you do not have that opportunity for ideas to slowly be introduced. And again, it's more or less just directly injected because of this luxury, because of its availability to give others just a quick glimpse of what it's like to be in agreement. And then unfortunately, a lot of people do have those issues with dopamine addiction. Getting your I refer to it as eye candy, but getting things that visually excites you. And then, have you ever noticed that whenever there's access to that, you suddenly find yourself also in sort of a track, to where there are other things that are introduced to you, And by associative manner and moment of feeling, do you find yourself suddenly almost not necessarily obligated, but al- you find yourself being influenced to also enjoy the same type of experience that's being offered at that time. And it's like, I mean, here's a generality. Um, how many people like drive through? You get your favorite coffee, then suddenly you hear your favorite song, or it could be your favorite song, and then suddenly, hey, I remember, associative memory, and this causes me to go do this. It's all chained influence, and it's like too many people have these influences, and they create just strong, stark, and that's German stark. That's also strong, but um, strong opinions to where they're unmendable, to where they refuse to generally to consider that other people may share the same opinions, either based on skin color or ethnicity or religion or uh, just general the way that they present themselves, because the way that they've been conditioned and the way that over the centuries it has been to where there's this, and sadly it's referred to as progressive, but it's more or less when you overlook a lot of the actions that created the society. If it's the mass genocide, in less than 100 years, over 30 million Native Americans are killed. And it's like, less than 100 years. I mean, what does that tell you? If people make the claim that, such like with DNA, and I'm not, stating that DNA doesn't exist. I'm just not a big follower of it, because a lot of times people become overwhelmed, and that's what they simply seek to promote, that through this DNA you've created the superior human. What about the psyche? I mean, yes, they may have the best genetic data to be the most physical, to be, the most resilient, or to have the highest intelligence capacity. But what about the soul? If the soul has been corrupt, joy and murderous personality types, if not survive these wars or mass genocides, as they are the effectors, the actors of this, are then passing on that DNA to their children. And so easily, so quickly is it, I find myself and other Hispanics and other people with brown skin subjugated to that type of mentality. Yeah, it may not be, oh, well, there's no way to record it, we're not liable. But now that, even with that modern society, people following in line, and I'm not a big agreeer of, the back and forth, the daily rush. Always have to be here. I have to be here. Make sure, and it's cultural and generational conditioning. If you always find yourself out of light, you always needing to do one extra thing in order to get this, in order to be quicker at checkout. You always need a debit card, or in order, there's always something that you need to do in order to be able to enjoy something. In order to, own a car, you have to have a job. In order to have a job, you have to pretty much obligate yourself to other people's treatment. And there's no guarantee that it'll be in the best interest of you. It's always in the best interest of what promotes that part of society. And in turn, it does reflect English society. Whereas, you need that order. You need to show what is the best representation of what, progress is. But if you consider, again, with that type of hostility, and it's never do you see that type of I mean, how often is it reflected upon? Well, during these years, and it's never in that direct statement. It's more or less, well, this happened, and this is what happened. You never get the actual numbers for the number of people killed, and it's later, only if you've done the research. But after a decade and a half of just, kind of, you know your fingers just dabbing in it, and it's just hit or miss here and there as to the actions that occurred. And then even with that, all of these luxuries coming in, and all of these experiences that do not include the consideration of what your own populace, what your own race has done. And it's just more or less, well, that's, it's almost being generalized as to that's just how it was. And there's no, how do you say, there's no liability for it. And of course, there are some general, more modern ways that most people would refer to as appropriation or reappropriation, but the concern being that does not directly impact those who are currently subject to this type of treatment, which is, and, again, I mean, I shouldn't, I'm a little bit older, but why is it even almost, sadly, if I'm older than people that are going to the same school as me, they do not really care my age, just my skin color. And I'm like, do you think that, just because of my skin color, that I don't have any credibility to make these claims and validate them by your hostility, these actions that you push upon me just simply because what? Oh, because of my skin color, because you were never told that all people, regardless of race, have some credibility. Instead, it's easier to attempt to intimidate me or just, push direct hostility on me, and it not being, oh, well, you F this and that. It's, once you try to incite that type of emotion, make somebody feel, fear or anger or whatever it is, just by, even if it's just, crappy, the body language just sells most of it. But, if it's whatever, it's just judging people by what they don't own. I mean, that's pretty pathetic, but it's a constant, and it's especially a constant here. And I'm assuming it's growing in the city too. But in any sense, I won't worry. I won't reflect too big on the big city right now. The concern is that with all the actions that go on, people again through that generational conditioning overlook their actions, and they're like, oh, well, it didn't cause them to, you know self-harm or go out and harm others that we actually care about. So then obviously it must not be that bad. So if people are being given that leeway and there's no accountability for it, how is it that doesn't spur a continuation and continued and sustained lack of regard for that action? Like, well, if it wasn't that bad yesterday, and I think they were almost going to cry, then I could probably just pick up from there. And it's like, I mean, you're intentionally going out to provoke a fight so you can validate some type of physical response. I mean, that is just one of the most redundant and pathetic, just stale-minded approaches that would not even be registered, even on the sense of just ignorance, because that's just stupidity. It's undeveloped. It's just undeveloped temperament. I mean, it's just, again, it's conditional hatred that, most people just refuse to even consider their actions. They never could even, fathom thinking, saying out loud, well, what is it that I'm doing? Because they're so disconnected, their psyche from their actions. It's just that mentality to where it's just so validated, those actions, those types of, hostilities, or just, and it's like you should never have to feel as though either you're unwelcome or that you've done something to validate their hatred, which would then, of course, exacerbate into some type of altercation. I mean, what motivated a person to get out of bed to look for people to intentionally intimidate? I mean, that's hatred. That's racism, man. I mean, what do you want me to do? Just tell you, you know what, you're right. You deserve to hate me because of the way I look or because of my skin color. Because you know what, I'm on the land that my all of my generations were on before. But because you took it by force, suddenly I'm obligated to tell you that your treatment of me now is even more just than it was before, and that we should just rewrite laws that if you feel the need to, take my life, then it's justified just simply because it's what you wanted. I mean, my God. I mean, this is just it's not out of hand, because that would mean at any one point it was something that was rationale and just got out of control. I mean, no matter what we have before us, I mean, excuse me, a means of conveyance, like, with the internet or text messaging or fast internet, any way that you can communicate with other people, it doesn't matter what did they have 100 years ago. I mean, it was just simply electricity, but it made life easier. And before that, I think it was being able to have more productive, like, crops. But I mean, in 100 years from now, I mean, and that's kind of what disturbs me, is whenever people come to the belief that they're just going to become the superior race overnight, and that's, when they start modifying DNA or start directly discriminating. And my biggest concern is, you can put the smartest person to solve all the world's problems, but if they do not have even the slightest bit of consideration as to how it might affect other cultures, then it's worthless. Because if you try to just more or less create like an obsequential result to where others will not feel the impact in a positive manner. And it's kind of like, well, we might have use for them, and I hate that because I refer to that as pretentious elitism, to think that, oh well, only, and a lot of newer generations are just strictly, well, because you're not this race or this race, and it's generally, I get it because I'm Hispanic. It's like, you're not in the you're not in the picture. And I mean, and it sounds racist coming from me if I were to say, I get it from Caucasians, I get it from African Americans, I get it from Koreans, but I do get that treatment. And it's like, I mean, I even get it from other Hispanics. Don't get me wrong. I get it from people that are from Mexico, that are Mexicans, because you know just a little side story, if they look at us and their motivator is money, and they're willing to break their bodies for payment because their country is so poor, and then it's reflected upon us as though we don't care. It's like, I think that we're fighting our own battle, and what you're doing is rushing up from behind or from the back to tell us that we're not even fighting in the right fight. I mean, I think that over the generations, the decades, and then what we're able to reflect upon is that the challenge lies in, where is it that you find yourself, where is it that you find the need to put yourself where you're telling others that their pace is not only incorrect, but I mean, if you attack another culture's philosophy because you have not had that same experience in that circumstance, does that make you a wise fool? I mean, because the only thing you're doing is you're creating a future subjugation for your children or your family, to where, and I mean, I've felt the impact from, and I won't bring my political affiliation into this, but um, people don't recognize me by my political affiliation just because they form these stereotypes, and it's just like, well, let's just not discuss politics. But that's always. But in any sense, let's just say that the rationale that occurs with a lot of people is that um, whatever actions and idea in mind that they have, that is just going to manifest like, well, I don't like this type of person, so my next actions. And then what I'm saying is that if they're saying, you know if I don't like this person, then they just don't need any opportunities. So that makes my perfect world. And I've always joked about that, and not because I supported Nazi Germany, but because if they had a blonde hair, blue-eyed super soldier, and the next thing you see is that same type of militaristic outlook and structure, and then you have Captain America, and that's pretty much been, there's not too much, diversity in terms of superheroes. They're, either white or green. So, but in any sense, it's just more or less you get that type of, you're more or less given that type of application of treatment to where it's like, well, you know, this is pretty much, and again, that's that generational conditioning, and pretty much where you find yourself subject to all this, I call it blast media, because they're pretty much promoting this is the only way, and this is the ideal, and this is how you become the best. And it's elitism, where there's no consideration as to what made even that type of far-sighted fantasy, not necessarily a commonality, but something to enjoy. But a lot of people took it to where not only is that the way of life, just like it doesn't matter if you're older than them, you're not important. And that for me is probably one of the most disturbing and disgusting, just repulsive tidings that you can provide to people. And it's just like, why is it you cannot draw the line and just understand that your life is meant to be a mentor, to be a positive influence, to not always give people what they want, just, and this is on account that you need to be able to reflect on your actions and not have that potential to feel guilty about them. And more people are concerned that, well, if this isn't what I'm seeing myself as enjoying, because I spend more time trying to, because I'm so purchased on what I believe, on what is presented to me as what is successful. Always having that beer, always being the one that's at this party, or always being the one that, and a lot of people overindulge. I mean, there are things that you can enjoy, but it should never take over your opinion or your point of view, where you just become a creature of habit. And I call it consumerism, because most people are only concerned about fulfilling these wants. They refer to them as needs, but I mean, if you go to other countries where famine is still present, where running water is still a challenge, and where people are oppressed either by their religion or just by their skin color, and it's been referred to as colorism because even people within our own culture, if you don't have a certain type of skin color, skin tone, if it's darker, if it's lighter, there's a little bit of there's that friction or adversity there. But um, let's just state that with all these luxuries, with all that we have before us, it's never shared. It's more or less just like, well, this is what makes me better. And unfortunately, I feel that's sort of the source of the pandemic, where it's almost seeming like without China releasing those numbers, maybe it's manufactured. But I mean, I don't want to create any type of rift, but if our nation, the US, is the most affected, does that indicate that possibly the U.S. has been and its citizens have been a little bit overzealous in their display of this wealth, to where they go to other countries and act disrespectfully? They don't respect other cultures' customs, and they treat them with indignity and just walk all over them. I mean, this and that, in addition to, I think, just attempting to create this world peace through socialism by telling people that this is the only way a civil society works. And if you don't agree with it, if you don't meet our ideals, and that being, and again, I hate to be very direct with certain time periods, but it affects us Hispanics especially. But if it's not in agreement with a total outlook for, well, this is the only way. You always have to have this, this eye candy, this dopamine high, this way of seeing things through that type of it, and it's a radical form of socialism because it's called conformism, and it's not totalitarianism where you have just a strict rule, but it in other countries that are affected by presence, and then be it military or just again the completely bigoted, unmotivated, just I'm just here to tell you why I'm better than you type tourist, then again, the challenge is with that avoidance of military conflict, be it proactive or responsive, it almost goes hand in hand that the number of deaths are almost equal to what we would see in World War II or World War One, or even, the Spanish flu or the Black Death. All these types of famine or disease that slowly, it's almost like the earth is trying to balance itself out. But I mean, some responsibility, yes, does fall here. Some responsibility is here. But more people are more concerned about placing blame on one direct, just simply because they want to all that conditional and generational hatred, they want to put it in action. And it's like that, in addition to being a fallacy, that is a precedent for war, civil war, world war, national. I mean, I can tell you one thing, that from my experience, just having to deal with either verbal altercations or physical or just dealing with crowds, you can't control mass hysteria. Not because more people are motivated to create anarchy, but because more people that are unwillingly and directly involved begin to fear for their own safety. So, unfortunately, I think that if things continue to unravel in terms of people's sanity, they're going to be caught in between, more or less. And again, it depends on the population, the political environment, uh, direct and indirect motivators. It could be personal friends or just being at the wrong place at the wrong time. But there are people that you come into contact with on a daily basis that do not have that level psyche, that are so wrapped up and obsessed with what's being told on the news, that it sort of overexcites their already biased point of views, be them political, religious, or whatever, and they frenzy people. It's kind of like somebody who rubs their feet on the carpet and they've got extra big socks, and you can't directly, you see them and you don't want to, you avoid touching them, but you can almost feel, like they say, like the static in the air, like if you get too close, or you can just kind of feel the hairs jumping on your arm, and it's like, you know you gotta be precautionary, and just you will have fewer and fewer moments to uh, express your ideas, because you're almost more concerned with observing others' actions. And it's like, you know, more people are trying to rationalize now just being a little bit more over invested in their responsibilities at work or with family, or just in generalities, in whatever routines, they could be hobbies, or things that they enjoy, to where it's detracting from their character, and they're more or less they're introverting themselves, in a sense that they are unable to cope with the reality that there is uh, the potential for mortality out there. There is the potential to be, there's the potential to contract something that could, take your life. So, in any sense, I got to go later.